Last episode, I talked about rule burden, how having all these OCD-seeming everyday systems rules can actually make life easier and more pleasant because it reduces the stress of decision burden and increases your appreciation and even enjoyment of one might otherwise call the daily grind. Any stress in having to remember and abide by these rules is more than counterbalanced by these benefits. But as one attentive listener pointed out, Danke Stefan, that's well and good for systems that are simply swaps for unregulated behavior, that replace one set of actions or attitudes with another, order for disorder, good use of time for bad use of time. But what about systems that actually take extra time, that have you do something that you were not previously doing in any way, shape, or form? Now, all the everyday systems, even those that do take time, are time efficient. That's an important design principle. Shovel glove, for example, famously takes only 14 minutes of schedulistically insignificant time. But still, 14 minutes is not nothing. And if you are practicing several such systems, it adds up. It isn't so insignificant anymore. It's another dimension of the exact same question I asked last time. Cumulatively, how can that not be too much system? Not in terms of rules, but in terms of time. I call this similar, but to my mind, distinct problem, task burden as opposed to rule burden. That's what I'm going to talk about today. And I'm going to address this problem of task burden by describing a concrete system that I've alluded to before in passing, but never devoted an entire episode to or mentioned by name. I've been practicing and refining it for several years now, and it's time for the full reveal. Task burden is the weight of the effectively infinite things you have to do in the finite time that is available to you. Systems can add to your task burden, systems that take time, but systems are not the only things that take time. Other things you have to do, errands, work assignments, anything that takes time, are also competing with you, with them for your limited time and attention. You have to consider all these things together. The naive self-help guru will tell you that somehow with their approach you can fit it all in, or at least the important stuff. It's just a matter of implementational efficiency, of organizing your efforts. The more advanced self-help guru sees that this is hopeless, and that the most important thing to do is acknowledge and accept this hopelessness. Not only can we not get it all done, or even the important stuff, but we don't even have sufficient time to figure out what the most important stuff is. First things first, and the 0th thing is to figure out the first thing, and even that can take forever. On one level, this resignation is the wiser approach. But I still need to get the kids to school on time, and most of us have other people who depend on us, families, kids, friendships, at work, real responsibilities. We can't just abandon these to zen out and become monks or hermits, living in the now and accepting our finitude. So we need a synthesis. We need to somehow get stuff done, some stuff, enough stuff, while simultaneously accepting that on some important level, it is utterly impossible. I've talked about this tension before in Time Box Lord, in Aristotelian Self-Portrait, in Clock and Calendar, Your Sword and Shield, in Allocation Mind. But in this episode, I'm going to describe a concrete system that brings a lot of these ideas together in a way that can help you manage task burden, both practically and metaphysically. I call it Aristocal, or Aristotelian Self-Portrait in the medium of the calendar. Although, as I'll discuss in a minute, Allocal, or Allocation Mind in the calendar, or Retrocal, retroactive calendar, might also have been good names for it. There's certainly good names for aspects of it. But Aristo honors the initial inspiration, and it also means best in Greek, so I figure I might as well stick with the first and best name. In a nutshell, Aristocal involves using an electronic calendar, either Microsoft Outlook or Google Calendar or whatever you prefer, to map out not just events and meetings, but also your personal habits and tasks. It helps you do and accept what you can't do by getting it all out in front of you as much as will fit, like the No-S diet does with food on a plate. You see if your tasks will fit on the plate of your calendar. One thing that's terribly confusing about working with calendar apps is the terminology. The word calendar is used for three distinct things. One, it's used for the program itself, Microsoft Outlook or Google Calendar or whatever Apple calls their thing. Two, it's used for the scaffolding of time that you lay events on, the actual timeline, the months and years and days and minutes. Three, it's used for groups of events, the stuff that you overlay on the timeline. By default, in a calendar app, you have one group of events, and all of your events are in the same group. But as I'll explain in a minute, a key mechanism of Aristocal is making multiple groups of events. So I have to make sure to distinguish between these three very different meanings of the word calendar, or you're going to have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm going to try to be careful to use the words app, timeline, and event group instead of just calendar. Aristocal has three core ideas. One, calendar as ledger. By starting at the level of time and then divvying it up, rather than starting from a list of tasks, you are forced to be more realistic about what you can accomplish. If you start with a separate to-do app for your tasks, there's this disconnect between your tasks and the time you actually have available, and you quickly lose touch with reality. It's like trying to balance your budget when you have your income in one app and your expenses in another. By putting it all in the calendar, you can balance your time budget much more effectively. It's also a lot simpler. Only one app, a relatively straightforward app that you are no doubt using already, versus a second app for task management, probably an overcomplicated app that you keep on changing and having to relearn because every 5 minutes some newer and cooler task management app is coming out. This is the allocation mind aspect of Aristocal. To-do listing with the focus on allocating your limited time. If it doesn't fit, mourn it and move on. It won't all fit. And it might take you a few weeks or months or years or lifetimes to fully grok this. But the sooner you start, the sooner it will start to sink in, both on a practical work with it level and hopefully on a spiritual acceptance level. What part of your life should you allocate like this? Not all of it. I think that would be full-on psychotic and not just borderline OCD. I stick with work hours on work days and my pre-work morning routines. Evenings and weekends and S days I leave open or at least full of gaps. I'll stick regular calendar events in there, like if we're going to see a show or something, and even some habits, as I'll discuss in a minute, but it's not the full accounting ledger. It's important to have some time off the books to breathe, and not just an event that says breathe, as the OCD part of me is tempted to do, but no events at all. 2, calendar as self-portrait. The other core element of Aristocal is that in addition to events and meetings and to-dos, you stick your habits and routines in there as recurring events. Anything that takes time needs to be accounted for on one level, simply for budgeting purposes, along with your other tasks. Does it fit all these wonderful habits that you want to start practicing? Can you afford time-wise to commit to them? When? Can you balance the books? So far, this sounds a lot like the ledger I just described, but it's also, with these habits and routines especially, an exercise for self-knowledge. As Aristotle supposedly said, actually Will Durant, you are what you repeatedly do. So what do you repeatedly do? Get it in the calendar. Look at it. That's you. That's who you are. That's your Aristotelian self-portrait. 3, calendar as diary. The last core element of Aristocal is that as your calendar moves from the past to the present to the future, you move your entries around to record what actually happened. If a meeting was canceled or rescheduled, delete it or drag it somewhere else. If you missed your shovel glove session, ditto. Leave no task behind. If it didn't happen, move it to the future or delete it. Your calendar is not just a plan for the future, but becomes a record of the past. This is helpful both to teach you to become a better planner, because it's a little painful to have to redrag and remove stuff, a tiny little Pavlovian pain signal, productive negative feedback. But it also provides a helpful record you can come back to consult, a sort of diary in the calendar. As you get better at Aristocal, most events will actually happen as planned, so you won't wind up dragging or deleting much. That makes it a pretty cheap side effect diary. I call this aspect of it retrocal or retroactive calendar. You start with a calendar about the future, and bonus, you get a diary about the past. That's it. The 3 pillars of Aristocal: ledger, self-portrait, and diary. All in all, it's a simple idea, but there are some technical finesses that I find critical to making it work. There are 3 of these too, these finesses, so they don't line up with the 3 pillars. The first technical finesse is making non-blocking event groups. What does this mean? Normally, when you create an event in your calendar app, it's in the default event group and marks the time it takes as busy time. That means it shows up in your calendar in the default color, and if someone tries to make a meeting with you, the time is blocked off and shows as busy. This makes perfect sense for work meetings. You want to block off your availability and communicate it to your coworkers. We'd spend half our lives trying to find available meeting times without these blocking events. But for private habits and tasks that are just you, and you have some flexibility about rescheduling, you want to get them in the calendar so you can budget for them and remind yourself of them. But because it's just you and you can be more flexible about moving them, you don't want them to show up as blocking tasks that prevent people from scheduling meetings with you. This way you can map out your entire day without becoming unreachable to your coworkers. So, in addition to my regular default blocking work event group, I create a non-blocking event group. I create a non-blocking work event group and a non-blocking life event group. Each has a different color, so I can see at a glance what my work-life balance is. If I have a life event, say a doctor's appointment, or parent-teacher meeting, or lunch with a friend during work hours, that stays a blocking work event to stave off meetings, but I mark it as out of the office for visual clarity. I have a further non-blocking event group called procrastination, which I retroactively apply if I wound up just wasting time during Aristocal hours, but I really never have to use this anymore. It's not that I don't ever procrastinate anymore, just that it's rarely of this unplanned kind. See my episode for proactive procrastination for more on that. When I procrastinate intentionally like that in a planned, logged way, I count it as a regular, non-blocking life task. Still, I keep this procrastination event group around as a punitive threat, just in case I'm ever tempted to backslide. So that was the first finesse, non-blocking event groups. I find non-blocking work and non-blocking life the most helpful of these, but maybe other categories will occur to you. The second finesse is sizing your events for dragability. Ideally, you would schedule your events for the exact time you plan to do them, and there would be only one event scheduled at a time. But calendar apps make it very hard to read thin events that take very little time, and they make it even harder to drag them around. You try to grab one to drag and drop, and all of a sudden you've resized it, and Control-Z doesn't even work to size it back. The solution: make a compromise with the reality of how calendar apps are built and design your events for dragability. Keep them a size that allows for easy reading and dragging. For most events, 30 minutes seems to be the sweet spot, even if this means 10 or 15-minute events become 30-minute events. Just stick them next to each other in the same time slot so it appears that they are happening simultaneously. You won't really do them simultaneously. When you get to this block, you'll do them each one after the other. At least that is the idea. It would be nice if calendar apps let you set a left to right order for such events so you could indicate a sequential order within this slot, but they don't, at least as far as I can see. Generally speaking, the only time I will size an event smaller than 30 minutes is if someone has scheduled an event for 45 minutes and I have a gap to fill. Aesthetically, I don't like to see any gaps in the Aristocal portion of my day. But I don't stress about down-to-the-minute accuracy. If my event scheduled from 9 to 9:30 went till 9:35, it's fine. If I don't get to an activity at all within its allotted block, then I'll move it to reflect reality better. But otherwise, I don't fuss over it. Just as we don't fuss over calories on the NOS diet, we don't fuss over minutes here. The third finesse is calendaring in the calendar. The process itself takes time and you need to budget for that. So your first work event every work day should be the meta event of getting the rest of that day's events in order, taking a first pass over allocating all your tasks to your available time that day, pushing out future days what doesn't fit, moving or deleting tasks that didn't actually happen yesterday. I budget half an hour for this, which seems like a lot, but I usually wind up needing it. It takes some hard thinking, coming up with a battle plan for the day, reviewing yesterday and deciding what to push out to the future. As with any other task, the planning task goes into the calendar as a recurring event, first thing every workday. Another reason scheduling the calendar planning session first thing is valuable is that it pushes you into productive thinking mode right away. It doesn't give you a chance to get distracted by emails or news feeds or social media. And then, once your plan is in place, you see that you don't really have much time for these things. Distractions will still happen, maybe. You will go off plan. But the plan provides some useful friction to keep them at a minimum. With the day's events fully and beautifully laid out, you really don't want to have to insert a procrastination block in there, pushing something else out of the way. That's it. Aristocal. 3 conceptual pillars, 3 technical finesses, and 3 confusing uses of the word calendar disambiguated. I've been practicing Aristocal for a little over 3 years now, and here are a few things I've learned in the process. One thing I've noticed is that the earlier I schedule something during the day, the likelier it is to get done. This is both because I have more time to reschedule if something else comes up, but even more because those hours tend to be more in my control and something else is less likely to come up. The hour and change before anyone else in my family is awake is a time when I usually can't be interrupted. I make sure that this is when my top priority routines happen. Another thing I've noticed is that putting habits in the calendar is helpful not just to budget for them, but to actually build them as habits. By doing the same things at the same time in the same order every end day, as specified in the calendar, I associate each activity with the other neighbor activities, and one starts to lead naturally to the next. Another thing I've had to learn is how to weather those days when reality just punches you in the face and very little goes according to plan. I try to anticipate these days when possible. I think of them as emergency days, another category beyond N&S days. When I do know in advance, or at least early in the day, that, say, we're going to be in the ER for who knows how long, I can try to squeeze in an homage version of at least some of my habits, say 3 minutes of something instead of 7, and push other stuff to the future, moving tub and toilet Tuesday unsatisfyingly to Wednesday. I try to be cheerful. I try to be cheerfully flexible, practice defense in depth, get a first responder adrenaline kick out of triaging what I reduce, defer, or just skip. But sometimes I just have to accept that reality had other ideas for me that day. Then I try to record what actually happened as best I can, or to at least get the retroactive diary benefit. But refrain from flagellating myself if I can't even do this. I give myself spider hunter spider points if I noticed it was painful, and Spider Hunter bonus points for hopefully accepting it with a good grace. If you're listening to this rather than reading, thank you, first off, because that's the primary way I hope most people will experience this podcast. I like to think there's something I convey with my voice that doesn't make it to the transcript, a less lossy, if slower, form of transmission. But for this episode, I do have a visual in the transcript, a couple of visuals that might be good to consult, a couple of screenshots from my own Aristocal. The first screenshot is in work week view on my computer, Monday through Friday, which is usually the view I use. When I took this screenshot, it was Wednesday morning. So Wednesday is thicker than the other columns, and you can see a little black line marking what time it was. It's pretty busy. Broadway boogie woogie. There are hundreds of events. It might seem crazy. But if you think about it, most of our lives are sufficiently complicated that if you captured it in a calendar, it would look like this. I don't know if I'm doing more or much more, but I think I'm making better choices about what I'm doing. At the very least, I feel better about them. I've also included a screenshot of a single day on my on my phone Outlook app. It works quite nicely in this view as well, at least to look at. A quick to-do list sanity check. Why do I use Microsoft Calendar? Because that is what I have to use for work. And that's where the bulk of the non-negotiable blocking events I have to work around have to live. I need to massage my habits and other life tasks around these, so that's where it makes sense to operate. I also have a Google Calendar, which I use to communicate personal events with my family. If there's a family event that falls during the workday or a work event that takes place outside of my usual work hours, I will invite myself on the other calendar to make sure I budget for and communicate it in both places. I recommend doing Aristocal in whatever calendar app you have to use for work, which feels weird because a lot of the events are personal and private, but if you stick them in another calendar app, then you're going to have to keep both of them open all the time during the workday, and the ledger is going to be too hard to balance. The last thing I'll mention, just briefly, is personal punch cards, the index card-based task management system I've been practicing for many years and am more addicted to than ever. You may wonder how these fit into Aristocal. There is certainly a lot of redundancy. I write my tasks on the cards, I write the same tasks on the calendar. At least in part, they are two expressions of the same thing that I keep in sync. Why? Why this redundant effort? Why not just pick one? It's a good question, but the answer is a little involved, and since this episode is long enough already, I think I will defer my answer until I revisit personal punch cards later in another episode, hopefully later this year. For now, I'll just say, yes, it's partially redundant, but it's good redundancy, like that extra engine on an airplane. It's redundancy that helps me stay on course even through severe turbulence. When I look at my Aristocal, one thing that is inescapable is that there isn't time for anything else. Every moment, at least on end days until after work, is allocated. If I want to do something else, I have to give up something for it. That may be worth it, but I can't pretend there is no cost. Something is always going to be neglected. It's just a question of what. Am I neglecting the right things? That is the question I ask myself, instead of getting bummed out by the fact that I neglected anything at all, which is a given. One thing I am happy I did not neglect today is finishing this podcast. I hope you found it useful or interesting, or at least entertaining. Thanks for listening.